Welcome to Something Went Wrong, all about accessible error messages. As Heather said, I'm Kelsey Kloboski. I'm a senior digital accessibility specialist here at Accessible Web. Today, we'll be discussing error prevention as well as when to use error messages. We'll also go over guidance for how to write error messages and how to code error messages. So first, where do I need error prevention? Under the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, requirements for error prevention depend on the level of conformance you're trying to achieve and the type of user information involved. It is a best practice and a WCAG 2.2 AAA requirement to always include an error prevention mechanism when users are submitting information. Error prevention is helpful for everyone, so it's a good idea to implement this guideline even if you're not aiming for full AAA conformance. Everybody makes mistakes, and good error messaging can smooth the user experience for everyone. For WCAG 2.2 AA conformance, error prevention is required for only the following types of information submissions: financial transactions, legal commitments, user controllable data in data storage systems, and user test responses. Examples of these types of submissions include online shopping, updating an online profile or account, or completing an online quiz. There are multiple error prevention techniques to choose from to meet these requirements. Common examples include an option to reverse or undo the submission, a step to review and confirm the submission, or automated checks for errors as the user creates the submission. Many websites and apps use multiple error prevention techniques. You've probably seen one or more of these methods yourself. For example, anytime you've used a food delivery app and had the chance to double check your shopping cart and drop off address before finalizing the order, you've encountered the confirmation method. When do I need an error message? For sites that use the automated check technique, error messages are both required for WCAG conformance and incredibly helpful for your users. So, for example, a form detects that a required field has been left empty, so the submission fails. If users aren't informed of this error, they may never know that the form didn't submit. Even if they do realize something went wrong, they may not want to take the time to figure out what went wrong, or they may not be able to figure out what went wrong. Anytime your website or app automatically detects a user error, then the content must supply an error message. Good form error messages can mean the difference between a new customer sign-up and a missed opportunity. With well-written and well-coded error messages, users can identify what went wrong and fix the problem more efficiently. So in our example screenshot here, we can see a form where someone skipped the last name field, which was indicated as required, and there's an error message notifying them that the last name field is required and should have been completed. For certain types of fields, browsers can automatically detect errors and provide a native error message. However, native error messages may not meet all needs. So creating a custom error message is still a necessary skill for a couple reasons. First, native error messages may not be specific enough for your use case. For example, if you are requiring that users provide an email address from a .edu domain, native email input error messaging likely won't convey the domain requirement clearly. And second, not all native browser error messages are fully WCAG conforming. Relying solely on native error messages also means you are fully relying on the browser maker for that aspect of your conformance. And since browser makers can change that behavior at any time, the conformance may not be consistent. In a perfect world, browsers would consistently provide fully conforming error messages, but in our experience, that's not always the case. We do have an example screenshot here of a native error message of a skipped required path input with a pop-up error message, please fill out this field. And then similarly, we have a custom error message of a skipped required field that says this field is required. So when creating useful error messages, there are three important guidelines to follow. First, describe the error in text, including information about which item is causing the error. A common strategy is to include the field's name in the error message. So for example, if the user accidentally skipped the first name field, the error message, first name is required, tells them specifically which field has the issue. Second, include a suggestion on how to fix the error if known. This is especially important if information must be in a specific format. Suggestions can vary depending on the context. One way to provide a suggestion is to describe the specific instruction, and another way is to provide an example of a valid entry. So some examples here, your new password is too short. Create a password that contains at least 8 characters is an example of an error message that provides the specific instruction. Or invalid email address, example name at example.com is an example of an error message that provides an example of a valid data format. Even for data formats that you may consider common knowledge, like emails, still provide a suggestion for how to fix the error. This supports all users in efficiently correcting the error. On the design side, you can also incorporate visual cues that don't rely on color alone to help users be aware that an error has occurred. So, for example, a red X, where both the red color and the X symbol visually signal the presence of an error. While visual and design cues are not required for error messages for conformance, they can be very helpful to users. Now that I've created a helpful error message, how should I code that error message? First, programmatically relate the error message to the field it describes, such as using the ARIA described by technique. Or to put it in other words, use code to communicate which field the error message is about. Second, ensure that an error message is coded to be announced automatically by assistive technology, such as by using an ARIA assertive alert. ARIA, or Accessible Rich Internet Applications, has methods to flag important content updates so that assistive technologies can automatically present them to users. When error messages are coded correctly, your users are much more likely to know that an error has occurred and understand how to correct the issue. Finally, my additional advice for creating accessible error messages. Once you've implemented an error prevention technique, the best way to check that it's working well is to conduct testing with real users, including users with disabilities. Secondly, the other thing I want to mention is that this presentation has been a very high level overview of strategies and techniques. So definitely recommend to take advantage of resources that dig more into the specifics. So we do have a course in Accessible Web Academy called Labels, Cues, and Errors. And that course digs into this topic in more detail and includes code examples. W3AC, or the World Wide Web Consortium, also has an online tutorial about user notifications that I find really helpful. And finally, how Accessible Web can help. So we offer a number of products and services to support your accessibility journey, and that includes error messages and all the many other facets that go into digital accessibility. Our web accessibility software called RAMP is available to support you in tracking and managing accessibility work, and there should be a discount code available in the chat for a free temporary trial. We also offer consulting and training, which you're participating in right now with the webinar, but we also have our academy as well as offering personalized or customized trainings as best suits your team. We perform accessibility audits where we do a comprehensive evaluation of web pages and web apps or mobile apps to identify gaps in conformance, gaps in accessibility. And those evaluations do include evaluations of your error handling and error messaging. And we also prepare accessibility conformance reports using the VPAT or Voluntary Project Accessibility template. And this is essentially just a snapshot of the findings of our accessibility audit in terms of what areas are meeting the requirements and what areas are not. And with that, that brings us to our question and answer time. And thank you again for joining us today.